Welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 13. My name is Matt. This is a weekly podcast where I review multiple platforms and technologies to see which works best for you. And in today's episode, we talk about the future of Android, Chromebooks, and how you can get yourself a free Android device if you're willing to do just a little bit of work. I'm going to start off today by talking about an article that I recently read regarding Chromebooks and Android apps. And this article isn't the first article of its kind, and it's basically saying that over the next few years, Chromebooks are going to change drastically and allow the use of Android apps on Chrome OS. Now, currently, there is a way that you can run one Android app at a time on Chromebooks, but this includes the vast majority of Android applications, including the Google Play Store. And this is something that's coming down the pipe in the next few years on Chromebooks with touch screens, such as the Pixel, and also eventually Chromebooks without touch screens as well. Basically, what this does is this is a game changer because Google, for the first time, Chromebooks have outsold Macintosh computers. So this is now making Chrome OS a serious competitor to Windows. And in the past, where Windows was the platform where you could run basically any application that you needed, they had the most applications for users. Now this is a game changer because Chrome OS is becoming a platform with tons and tons and tons of software, not only for Chrome OS, but now for Android as well. So this got me started thinking a little bit about Android, and I wanted to do a show talking about different ways that you can run Android and my experience with it over the last few years, my thoughts, and then eventually I want to talk about how you can use Android for free if you're willing to do a little work. So my first experience with Android and mobile platforms was probably back in 2011, 2012, and I purchased a Droid Razr phone, and this was running Android 3.0, I believe. And I also bought a Toshiba Thrive tablet, and with the hopes of being able to do lots of neat things with this tablet because it had a USB drive, and it was one of the only tablets that had a full USB drive where you could connect a mouse to it, and I thought that was really interesting. Now, these devices were underpowered. They didn't really function that well. My phone would overheat quite often. And the one thing that I actually realized is that I really like the Android operating system over iOS. At that time, I had an iPod. And I really liked Android. I really liked the way everything was set up, how you could organize things. You could organize apps into folders. And it just seemed like you could do a whole lot more with the operating system itself, except for the fact when it came for the selection of apps. And the selection of apps that I needed were only available for iOS. So I eventually sold the Droid Razr and Toshiba tablet and switched over to iOS because of my workflow and because of things that I need to do, very specific applications that I needed to run sound equipment and certain things for being a musician. But in the back of my mind, I always really preferred Android over everything else. So I started researching a few different ways that I could run Android applications or be able to test Android without actually owning a device. The first thing I'm going to talk about today is something called BlueStacks. And what BlueStacks is, it's a technology company that produces the BlueStacks app player. And what that is, it's designed to enable Android applications to run on Windows PCs and Macintosh computers. So this was founded in 2009. And if you're interested in just running Android apps on your computer, and if you have an app that you like and you want to be able to use it occasionally, BlueStacks is an option for you. Now, because Android is open source, there are many projects right now that are in the works that we're going to talk about today. Android, if you don't know, is based off the Linux kernel, and the Linux kernel is like the base of Android. And believe it or not, Chromebooks are also based off this same Linux kernel. And because Android is open source, people can take the source code for Android and they can modify it and redistribute it in different ways. So if you've ever heard of something called CyanogenMod, that is an example of a project based off of Android that is not put out by Google. It's put out by another company. So what I want to talk about today is a program called Android x86. And what this is it's a way to run Android on your computer fully native without any other operating systems being in the way, such as Windows or Mac. So what Android x86 does is, if you have an x86 processor, which most computers nowadays are x86 processors, and I've been testing this on a USB drive for the last probably 8 or 9 months. I would say since about last October when I first discovered this. And what I did, I had a USB 3.0 drive, and they actually have a couple different releases of Android 4.4 and Android 5.1. And I had Android 4.4 running on a USB drive, and I would stick it into a computer and I would boot off the flash drive, and I would have a fully functional Android system. And basically, if you ever owned an Android device, it comes up and you enter your PIN number, and then you are brought to Android, and you can have access to various apps. And the one thing that I liked about it is it was portable, and it would just give me a way to test Android out without actually going and spending the money on a device, because I don't really need an Android device at this point in time, but I like to learn about it, and I like to talk about it as well. So this worked well, except for the fact that the USB drive speeds were sort of restricting, and it would really slow down the functionality of Android, and it would take a long time to open up apps and to download apps and things like that. And I have a test computer that I use, and I tried to install it on the test computer, and the only problem is that I couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work with this install of Android x86. So I pretty much kind of gave up on it, and every once in a while I would sort of boot up into Android and experiment for a little while and then put it away. And over the last few months, there has been major progress on using Android on the PC itself. And back in January, actually probably back in November, December, and into January, a new project came into the works and actually partnered with this Android x86 project. And this is called Remix OS. And this is something I'm going to talk in depth with you about today, because I'm really excited about this. So what Remix OS is it's sort of Android reimagined. If you know anything about Android, you're going to know that it's everywhere now. And there are more Android devices on the market than any other device. It's very powerful, it's flexible, and it's really fun to use. And what Android and Remix OS do is they are taking Android and bringing it to the desktop computer, so that you're going to see new devices coming out in the next few months and few years that sort of take that mobile feature and brings it to your other devices like laptops or desktops, because some people prefer the Android operating system. So let's get into this review of Remix OS a little bit. So again, what I did is I first installed Remix OS onto a USB 3.0 drive, and I would seriously recommend using a 3.0 drive if you're going to try this out. You can get Remix OS at jide.com/remixos, so that's jide.com/remixos. And what this is 3 former Google employees got together. They left Google, they started this project, and now called Remix OS. And so I went to the website and I downloaded the Remix file, and I installed it onto a flash drive. And at first I didn't really understand what I was doing. This was all a major learning process. So I had to format some flash drives, and a couple of different times to try to see exactly what it is I was using. And if you noticed last week in last week's episode, I talked about a little bit about flashing these hard drives, and I ran into some problems on my own accord, and that sent me down another path for about a week. So now I've come back to Remix OS, and I got it to boot up onto several different computers. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with this. So first off, before we get into the major review of this, I want to say that Remix OS is in beta. So it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be some issues that you come up with along the way. But this is a way that you can get Android on a PC for free legally. So when you have this USB drive, I recommend if you have an old computer and you want to try this out, I think it works best on Intel computers. It's not going to work on every computer just yet. There's still progress that needs to be made in this regard. But in my case, the computer that I used for testing, this is a laptop that was given to me years ago. This is a 2008 Dell laptop. And so I decided to take a chance. I wiped the hard drive on it, and I installed Remix OS onto it. So when you install Remix OS, you're going to find it looks a little different than most Android devices. It has a taskbar. It has a start menu. And what's really neat about it is the fact that most Android applications are going to work on it. Most Android apps are going to work well, unless the app itself hasn't been developed in a way that these apps will work on a computer. A lot of Android apps will work well here, and really, I only ran into a couple of different apps that did not work to some extent. So you have a taskbar on the bottom, just like you would in Windows. You have a start menu, and when you click the start button, it brings up a list of apps that you would normally see if you were to scroll through your apps in an Android device. And plugging in a mouse or using your trackpad works well for this type of interface. And one of the things that you need to do is you need to install the Google Play Store first. Google, the way that they work is they only let you install the Google Play Store by default if it is on tested software and tested hardware where it's going to work on your device. And because Remix OS is developed to run on lots of different types of hardware, they can't guarantee that the Google Play Store is going to work flawlessly. So you have to install the Google Play Store yourself from the Google APK. So when I installed this, the Wi-Fi worked out of the box, which I was really excited about. And it took me a little while to get the Google Play Store installed. Once I did, then my fun really started to happen, and I really enjoyed this. So I downloaded a bunch of apps, and I just wanted to try out various apps to see which ones would work and which ones would not work. And I was expecting that the games would not work. So I installed things like Facebook and the Chrome browser and Firefox browser. I installed apps like Feedly and Pocket and Quick Office. I installed a NASA app. I installed Dropbox and MediaFire apps. I installed Skype. I installed speed test apps. I installed TeamViewer, the Weather Channel app, tons and tons of different apps. Now, I also installed a few games. I installed some Lego Star Wars games. I installed a couple of different Star Wars games. I installed a Hobbit game. And I really ran into almost no trouble with apps. I installed Google Earth, and I could use Google Earth flawlessly with my mouse and trackpad. Google Drive worked great. I had downloaded a couple of music apps, a music tuner called ClearTune that I had on iOS. that worked fine. I also downloaded a music player called iReal Pro that I use a lot, and that worked fine. Now, there are some more intense games more graphically intense games that did not work. And I don't know if that's because the games weren't developed in a certain way, or if it was too much for the hardware on my computer to handle. There were a couple of apps that didn't work that I was expecting more apps to not work. But for the most part, I would say 90 to 95% of the apps that I downloaded worked well. Now, there are a couple of games that I downloaded that if I had a controller to work with, if I had a touchscreen interface, or if I plugged in like a PlayStation controller, I would be able to play these games better with some sort of handheld controller. And that's just something you're going to run into when it comes to playing games on a laptop using Android. So I haven't really experimented like that. That's probably going to be my next step, is experimenting a little bit about using controllers to play games on Android. So those are kind of the pros about using this software. Everything works well once you kind of learn how to get it working well. The Google Play Store works really well. There's also the Amazon App Store that's included as well. And you can, if you have a Kindle or if you have an Amazon device of some kind, then you can use the Amazon App Store, which I thought was a neat way to kind of include both worlds. Some of the cons that I want to talk about, it is still in beta, so there are a few bugs. There are a few apps that won't open, or once they are open, they sort of crash just occasionally. I haven't really had this problem a whole lot. So as I mentioned, some of the games don't work. But one of the things that I also tried to do is plug in an external monitor because I wanted to try a couple of different things. So I tried to plug in an external monitor. That support isn't available yet, but from what I've read, it is coming soon. In the past, I have plugged in some Linux computers to a smartboard and tried to use the touchscreen on a smartboard. That did not work because there is no external monitor support for this Remix OS as of yet, on probably certain devices, I would imagine. What's really neat about Remix OS is that they actually have some devices that are on the market right now. They call the Remix OS Mini, which is a very small, almost like a Chromebox or a Raspberry Pi type device. It's about the size of a bar of soap, I would imagine. And they also have a tablet too that they use. And this tablet comes in a 11.6 inch screen, 16:9 ratio, and weighs just under 2 pounds. I thought it was kind of a neat idea to have a couple of different options for a PC that you can have at home on a desktop. You can connect it to a TV, and they also have an Android tablet that is available for sale. So who would want an Android device on their laptop? What I would say is, if you are somebody who is interested in trying new things and interested in experimenting with new things and not expecting things to be perfect at this point in time, Remix OS is a really fun thing to try out. It's totally different than a Windows experience or a Mac experience or even a Linux experience. You have full access to the Google Play Store. Video works. I was watching, a couple of different videos to see if it actually played well, and I believe it does. There's a video that they include on the install that you can play, and sound works. So everything seems to be working well, and all of the keys on my keyboard seem to be working well. The volume up keys, volume down keys, things that normally you might run into problems with. Hibernate and sleep work well. And so there are a lot of different things about this that are sort of exciting and fresh to try out. And it's a way that you can get Android up and running for free if you want to put in the extra work for it. I ran into some problems along the way, but overall, it was very easy to install. And if you'd like some more information about that, you can feel free to contact me on that. I'd be glad to help you out and get you going on the install itself. And it's something that I would recommend not for a full-time use because, as I mentioned, there are some bugs that are in there. But overall, it works really well. And using Android x86 before this is something that I really enjoyed, but because it didn't quite work on the hardware that I had, it was something that I couldn't keep using. But with Remix OS, it seems to be a little more polished, a little bit more functional than just Android x86 by itself. So it works, it's a much better, much more pleasant experience in my opinion. So have you tried Remix OS? Have you tried something similar? I know there are other projects out there. There's another project called Phoenix OS, which basically is the same premise. It's Android for a PC, and that might be my next project to try that out as well. And we'll go from there. And now I have a platform where I can actually talk about Android apps in a little bit more detail. So I'm excited about that as well. Because one of the things that I like to do about this is I like to talk about just about anything that comes to mind, whether it's Windows, Mac, Chrome OS, Linux, Android, iOS. And I don't have to actually go spend the money to buy an actual Android device if I'm just going to be reviewing a product here or there. So again, if you're interested in this, feel free to contact me about Remix OS, and I would be glad to pass on the knowledge that I've learned over the last week about how to install it. Very simple process, but if you're unfamiliar with installing these types of things, then you may run into some problems along the way. So that's it for my review on Remix OS and Android x86. Again, there's a lot of changes coming to Android soon, and I'm excited about that. Okay, so to end today's episode, what I'd like to talk about is the results from last week's show, which I ran into some problems with activating 2 valid licenses, and I sort of had to contact Microsoft to get those activated and ran into all sorts of trouble. It took me 5 days, and finally after 5 days of making phone calls and spending hours on the phone with Microsoft, I was finally able to find a person who knew what I was trying to tell them and was able to help me out. And so finally I was able to get my licenses activated. So the lesson here is, if you are in need of something, in need of customer service, don't just rely on the first person you talk to or the second person you talk to. After a while, you might find someone who actually understands the problem that you're having and is able to help you out, which is the case that I had, luckily. So I'm happy about that. I'm happy to say I've got my installs back, and I'm back up and running, which is good news. And I'll continue to review some Microsoft products along the way for this show. So I'm excited about that as well. And before we go, with all of this talk today about Android and x86 and Google's platforms with Chrome OS and Android, I wanted to give a book pick today, and I wanted to talk about a book that I'm currently reading. I'm not finished it yet. This book is it's called The Circle, and it is by Dave Eggers. And this is sort of an interesting spin on technology, modern technology, and a company similar to Google in every respect, and sort of chimes into social networking and what our modern lives have turned into with all of these devices, with having to feel like you need to respond to everyone's posts on Facebook or on a social network, and having to post your life and basically having no privacy. It's a very interesting book about a person who gets hired at a business called The Circle, similar to Google. So if you're interested in that type of book, I would highly recommend that. So that's going to be it for today. Thanks so much for listening. If you have some feedback for me, go ahead and send me some feedback. You can email me. It's mrptechreviews@gmail.com. You can visit my webpage, mrptechreviews.wix.com/home. And you can visit my Facebook page where I post links to various articles that I'm interested in and sometimes gives ideas for future shows. It's facebook.com/mrptechreviews. So please give me a review on iTunes. Give me a 5-star review. Help me get more listeners. And if you are interested in hearing me weekly, you can subscribe to my RSS feed. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.